Thomas, welcome along to the podcast. Good to have you with
Thanks
us,
for
mate.
having me, Jason.
We are talking today about your latest column for Maxim, Rocking Chair to Nowhere, America and New Zealand 2024. Why the metaphor of rocking chairs, Thomas? Help me understand that.
It's certainly an interesting metaphor. So it comes from G.K. Chesterton. Chesterton, a very Englishman, went traveling in America in the 1920s, and he writes a book about it, What I Saw in America. And he kind of looks upon American culture with this great fascination at the strangeness, as well as the kind of points of connection with English culture at the time. And one of the things that strikes him is that Americans love rocking chairs. And then he offers some theories as to why culturally Americans seem to insist on moving around even while sitting down.
That's great. I get the other metaphor that I've heard is an octopus on roller skates, right? Lots of movement, but not much motion. So you've used that in relation to the American election, which as of the recording of this podcast, we don't know the outcome. By the time it's aired, we may. But this kind of in terms of the idea that every American political pundit every 4 years pulls out the card. This is the most consequential election, if not in a generation, then definitely of all time. Help us break down that a little bit. Why do they do that?
Well, I guess if you think about the basic incentives of both political pundits as well as commentators and journalists, is that they need to give the viewer a reason to tune in. Political activists want people to participate and get involved. Media commentators just want eyeballs or ears listening to their content. And so there's this need to kind of insist that this particular election matters a lot. And so I was reflecting on that phenomenon because sort of everyone is aware that that's the case. And I thought, well, is this election in America really one of them? And certainly is one of them
As
for
in
New Zealand.
This particular 2024 election, is it actually? I mean, it seems to be, given the kind of furor around it and the storm that the media is creating, plus the two assassination attempts on one of the candidates. It seems to be a bit more high stakes than previous ones, but I guess your question is it actually?
Yeah, I mean, and it's good you reminded me of the assassination attempt. I had kind of, Donald Trump did get hit by a bullet, and we all forgot about it, including me. I wrote the column this week, and it didn't even occur to me to mention that assassination.
It's amazing
attempt.
how those things get buried in the news cycle.
You just
right?
got to
like
move
48
on.
hours.
But also, there are some big kind of geopolitical reasons why it feels like it ought to be a really consequential election. We talk a lot around Maxim about, when we want to talk about where's the world heading in geopolitics and the decline of the kind of unipolar world where America is the only superpower. And so there is kind of a more unstable world now. So perhaps an American election should carry a lot of significance, because how will America as a superpower navigate that world? And so it should be a really important
I guess you think about it. You've got Ukraine, you've got the Middle East, you've got China, you've got BRICS rising, and all these sorts of things, and you would expect it to be consequential in terms of global impact.
Yeah, absolutely. But now when we look at the actual candidates we have before us, and the particulars of both the political parties who are contesting the presidency, it's not really clear how they will differ substantially.
Why is that?
There's probably a couple of reasons. Certainly Donald Trump as a particular political figure who has been well covered, it's not entirely clear he always operates out of a coherent foreign policy ideology. Donald Trump's, wanting to do a deal and to be strong, but it's not really clear in what sense he means those things. There's often talk about him being an isolationist, which in some sense is true. And he's certainly very pro-tariffs, and so that'll have some impact on trade. But you don't really know what Donald Trump wants in a foreign policy sense. But then again, with the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, she's been the vice president, and for the last 4 years, America's been continuing on its path. Whatever the case was in 2021 at the start of the Biden presidency, I think it's fair to say in 2024, Joe Biden is not exercising strong decision-making powers over American foreign policy, that he is not in a position where he can do that. And so the American foreign policy machine kind of just keeps operating. These are, big institutions that just keep chugging along. And Kamala Harris has not articulated any clear vision either about America's role in the world. And so we're left with two candidates. We just can't really predict what they would do in any given crisis.
I find it interesting that you point out in your column that the Biden government kept most of the Trump administration's tariffs. So like you say, things just kind of keep rolling on in a sense in the United States. There's that massive kind of leviathan of bureaucracy and the, for want of a better term, the deep state that just keeps doing what it's always done, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's worth mentioning there are sort of two reasons people put on tariffs, and Trump's ones could be a bit of both. The first is for allegedly financial or economic reasons, that they want to protect specific industries. And so Trump will talk about wanting to protect American car manufacturers, and they want those guys to thrive. And so they protect them from other industries. And then the second,
by putting tariffs on like imported cars.
Yeah, absolutely. So it makes it more expensive to import
overseas.
A car, so people will buy domestically made ones. But the second reason is just a kind of geostrategic foreign policy reason. So the example being, if America is really worried about China, they will put a whole bunch of restrictions on Chinese computer chips and things like that. They're worried about, so that's not about economic growth for America. It's really about a foreign policy competition. And so Trump brought in some tariffs that kind of had a bit of both of those. But with the economic ones, even if Biden and his administration were not strong protectionists and don't necessarily think they're a good idea, your government is still getting revenue from them, and you don't really want to give that up because you have all these spending objectives. And so taxes and tariffs are often quite sticky. Once they're put in, whether they're a good idea or not, they're very hard to remove. And so Biden didn't, in large part, walk back Trump's tariffs.
So if we can't say that this election is the most consequential, Thomas, before we get to the just finalizing your thoughts on this, what do you think is the most consequential election of the last generation then, if it's not this one? Because we can't really answer that at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly a tough challenge. So if we're going with really consequential elections in America, a lot of the big names who get a lot of airtime certainly are candidates. For better or worse, Franklin Roosevelt and the expansion of the American state and the New Deal, and then Ronald Reagan and his deregulation. Though even it's when these things get complicated, Ronald Reagan's deregulation in the 1980s had actually started to be kicked off under Jimmy Carter a bit earlier. So counterfactual history is hard, perhaps not as hard as predicting the future.
Alt history, it's a subgenre on YouTube that you can check out if you want to see what people think.
Oh, well,
alt history.
We'll have to include our favorite links in the podcast description.
That's right. So, okay, so it's actually hard to say what is the most consequential election generally. So let's put that to the side and say, well, what does the future of America look like either way, Thomas?
Yeah, it's like I've said, predicting the future is hard, but I think there's a lot of negativity about the future of America. At different points in time, I think about the 1990s or the election of Obama, there's this upswelling of profound optimism about America, both as a nation and as an ideological project, that America has this bright future. It's probably fair to say for sort of a decade now, there's been this deep malaise about the future of America, the kind of uncertainty. And And I'm not really convinced about that negativity. A lot of people have bet against America for a long time. Unlike, say, Europe, they've still managed to consistently experience economic growth over the last decade. And so my guiding assumption is that for the foreseeable future, the Americans will carry on much as they ever have, for better or worse.
So not economic catastrophe and civil war.
No, I'm a skeptic of all of those most negative predictions.
Might make for great clickbait titles, but it's not necessarily good prognostication.
Absolutely.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll wait to see how all of this plays out in the coming months and years. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Jess. That most English Englishman, G.K. Chesterton, observing the American taste for rocking chairs, theorized that their choice of furniture revealed something significant about the national character. A flippant critic might suggest that they select rocking chairs so that, even when they are sitting down, they need not be sitting still. For many Kiwis, American politics has become something of a sporting spectacle. Team colours, statistical forecast models, and thriving betting markets complete the effect. News coverage tends towards the immediate and the splashy, so culture war issues get the most coverage. For New Zealand spectators, the beauty of this is that the effect of such policies won't be felt here. We can enjoy the game without skin in it. Every American election, pundits trip over one another to declare most loudly that this is the most consequential American election in a generation, or better yet, of all time. Given the decline of the unipolar world, where America reigned as the only superpower since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992, it certainly feels like that should be the case. But, at least from a New Zealand perspective, the implications of this election are hard to predict. Certainly, Trump's proposed tariffs threaten to hurt our trade. America currently receives 12% of our total exports. Joe Biden kept most of the previous Trump administration's tariffs. The Democratic Party have always been unreliable free traders, and Harris might prove to be so as well. After a long hiatus, foreign policy is back as an election issue. But for all the talk of Trump's alleged isolationism, it's hard to imagine a genuine withdrawal from the world. Harris, for her part, expresses platitudes in foreign policy more than any profound theory. American foreign policy is currently operating without strong input from the president. There's no reason to think the machine won't continue to function as normal. Despite the general trend towards covering this as the most important American election, TM, there are invariably dissenters. This typically takes the form, America is sinking, and changing the ship captain won't make a difference. The evidence is easy enough to point to. The federal government hasn't run a budget surplus in over 20 years, and neither candidate has a credible plan to get there. Almost half of Americans think total economic collapse will likely happen within the next 10 years. But then again, many have gone broke before betting against America. The country continues to defy the economic malaise that's taken hold of the rest of the developed world over the last decade, still experiencing steady economic growth year on year. Despite the appearance of instability and conflict, American institutions remain strong. When going to the polls, Americans chose between "Make America Great Again" and "We're not going back." In all likelihood, both slogans will be proven wrong. America will continue much as it ever has, rocking back and forth, back and forth.